Hey guys, tonight we slip quietly into the side streets of ancient Rome, where the air is as busy as the people. You can almost taste it, the stew of olive oil, damp stone, grilled fish, and the occasional mystery scent rising from a nearby gutter. You walk carefully because the paving stones are slick, and someone just dumped a bucket of something you don't want to identify. You probably wouldn't survive this particular smellscape with your modern immune system, but that's half the fun, right? So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop your location and the local time in the comments. I always love seeing where you're tuning in from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The city hums, a kind of living machinery made of sandals, wheels, and gossip. You step out of your insula, the apartment block that creaks like it's one strong breeze away from collapse, and into the street below. It's already crowded. Hawkers shout about figs and fish, children weave between carts, and somewhere a donkey brays at nothing in particular. Rome never truly sleeps, it just changes tempo. Even at night, oil lamps spill gold across the uneven cobbles, illuminating faces that look both exhausted and eternal. You catch your first whiff of the Tiber River before you see it. It smells like mud, laundry soap, and the occasional unfortunate sacrifice to hygiene. The Romans loved water, but controlling it was an endless battle. Somewhere upstream, an aqueduct leaks into a field, and down here in the lower districts, runoff mixes with everything else. Still, to a Roman nose, this is life's perfume. Proof the city is working. You pass a public fountain, a spout carved like a lion's head, where a few people fill clay jugs. The water trickles clear, but you know better than to trust appearances. You watch a woman splash her hands and face, then walk off, wiping them on her tunic. She doesn't use soap. She doesn't need to. The cool water itself feels like luxury in a place where filth is the city's shadow. Every step you take is a sensory ambush. A vendor roasts chestnuts, their sweet smoke cutting through the stink of fish guts. A perfume seller fans a tray of glass bottles, offering to mask your reality for a few coins. You lean in, sniff something that claims to smell like the goddess Venus herself, but your nose says old rose and goat. Still, it's oddly comforting. Humanity trying to win the eternal war against odor. Historians still argue whether Rome was truly filthy or just normal by ancient standards. Archaeological evidence suggests both extremes. Clean marble facades masking alleys lined with refuse, pristine bathhouses only streets away from open cesspits. Some say the Romans tolerated grime because it was familiar. Others insist they were obsessed with order, and smell just got the better of them. Either way, you feel it clinging to your sandals. You stop near a thermopolium, a snack stand glowing under lamplight. It's the ancient Roman equivalent of late-night fast food, only riskier. The owner ladles stew from a deep terracotta jar, the aroma equal parts delicious and dangerous. You buy a portion, pretending not to notice the flies that seem equally enthusiastic. It's spiced with garum, that legendary fermented fish sauce that smells like a dare and tastes like umami heaven. You swallow a bite, telling yourself that the salt probably kills the germs. Probably. Somewhere nearby, someone dumps a chamber pot. The splash echoes like punctuation in the night. You instinctively step aside, too late. Your sandals take a hit, and suddenly you're part of the problem. You laugh softly, it's either that or cry, and remind yourself that even emperors had to dodge the same street surprises. Julius Caesar's polished sandals didn't always make it home clean. You wander toward the Subura district, where the real heartbeat of Rome thumps beneath flickering lamps. Prostitutes lean from windows, calling out in sing-song Latin. Bakers pull late loaves from glowing ovens, and the heat steams through the narrow streets. The walls sweat with soot, and the air is so thick you could probably slice it into servings. Somewhere a cat hisses, offended by existence. There's something beautiful about the chaos, though. You begin to notice the rhythm, how the city breathes through its smells. Fresh bread means morning. Roasted meat signals festival days. The sharp tang of vinegar and lye means someone nearby is laundering togas in a tub of questionable liquid. It's all information encoded in scent. To survive here, your nose learns the language fast. You find yourself at a public bathhouse entrance. Closed now, but the air still hums with memory. Steam curls from the cracks in the doorframe, carrying ghosts of olive oil and sweat. You'll explore it later, when it opens again at dawn. But for now, you stand outside and listen. Somewhere within, a late-night attendant scrubs the marble, whistling tunelessly. The baths are where Romans reset themselves, where cleanliness becomes both ritual and rumor. A rat scurries by with more confidence than you have, and you decide to move on. You pass walls marked with graffiti, tiny snapshots of humanity. One declares, "I washed here and felt reborn." Another says something less poetic, but far more realistic. "Don't drink the water." You smile. History leaves its honesty in scribbles. Above you, the stars fade behind smoke. Fires from cookshops and tallow lamps cloud the night sky, so even Jupiter's brightest planet looks a little weary. But the people keep moving, endlessly mending, washing, scraping, and surviving in their own unglamorous way. Hygiene here isn't about beauty, it's about endurance. And yet, there's a strange charm in it all. You begin to understand why ancient writers romanticized this chaos. Rome, for all its grime, was proud of its pulse. Every splash, every scent, every poorly aimed bucket was proof that the city was alive. You turn down one last alley, where the stone underfoot is slick with who knows what, and spot a fountain gurgling quietly. You lean down, cup your hands, and let the cold water wash the night's residue away. It feels clean enough, and for the first time you catch a whiff of something new, the faint sweetness of lavender drifting from a nearby laundry. Someone cared enough to make it smell nice. Maybe that's the secret of Roman hygiene, not perfection, but persistence. You straighten up, water dripping from your fingers, and breathe in deeply. The scent of Rome, for better or worse, is home to millions. And tonight, at least for this wandering moment, it's yours too. The next morning, you wake to the sound of dripping water, steady, rhythmic, like the heartbeat of the city itself. It's not rain, it's Rome's veins. Outside your window, the aqueducts are already hard at work. Silent stone giants channeling fresh mountain water across miles of countryside into the city's thirsting belly. You stretch, wipe the dust from your face, and step into the flow of people carrying jugs, amphora, and baskets toward the fountains. The air feels cooler today, sharpened by mist. You walk alongside a clay conduit that runs under the road, tracing it with your eyes until it disappears into an arched aqueduct in the distance. These things are miracles of math and muscle, arches and gradients so precise that water slides downhill for dozens of miles without complaint. You pause, trying to imagine the sound of rushing water echoing inside the stone tunnels as if the earth itself were sighing. You approach one of the city's great fountains, carved like a sea creature with its mouth gaping wide. The water spills clear and cold, catching sunlight like strands of glass. A line has already formed, men in tunics, women in veils, children with cracked jugs. You step closer, feeling the fine mist touch your skin, a reminder that even here, surrounded by grime, Rome knew how to dazzle. The fountain's purpose isn't just practical, it's political. Running water is proof that the city's machine is still humming. The emperors made sure you saw it, drank from it, and whispered their names as you did. You bend to fill a cup and taste it. It's metallic, faintly mineral, surprisingly pleasant. You tell yourself it's clean, though the canal upstream probably shares space with frogs, moss, and the occasional lost sandal. Still, it's better than the Tiber, where runoff and blessings from every neighborhood meet in a murky handshake. Historians still argue whether ordinary Romans trusted that river or merely tolerated it. Some sources suggest it was considered holy enough for purification rituals. Others hint that people avoided it unless desperate or superstitious. You wander along the edge of the aqueduct, tracing the water's journey with a lazy curiosity. The great arches stretch into the distance like an endless parade of stone ribs. Farmers and slaves built them, sweating under the Italian sun, guided by engineers who understood gravity like a religion. The longest one, Aqua Marcia, carried water for over 90 kilometers. Imagine maintaining that without modern tools, just ropes, pulleys, and a very patient surveyor with a wax tablet. A young boy runs past carrying a bronze bucket, sloshing water on his sandals. He's delivering it to a bathhouse nearby. Not everyone had private pipes. Only the rich could afford such luxury. Most people fetched water from public fountains or basins, hauling it upstairs one jug at a time. In fact, your neighbors above you probably have an entire workout routine built around avoiding dehydration. You smirk. Forget Pilates. Try Roman hydration training. You follow the boy into the bathhouse courtyard, drawn by the sound of water trickling through lead pipes into basins. Yes, lead. You frown a little as you realize what that means. The Romans didn't know, or maybe didn't care, that the same shiny metal that made their plumbing so durable could quietly poison them. A paradox of progress. Clean water carried in deadly pipes. Historians still argue whether lead levels were high enough to cause mass illness or just slow headaches. Either way, ignorance was bliss, and perhaps part of Rome's slow undoing. The courtyard itself feels like a cathedral to cleanliness. Marble benches ring the fountain, mosaics shimmer beneath shallow pools, and the air smells faintly of olive oil and wet stone. You watch as attendants scoop water into small jars, each destined for a bath, a kitchen, or a goddess's altar. Clean water wasn't just for drinking, it was life's lubricant. Bathing, cooking, washing clothes, appeasing the gods. Even the dirtiest corners of Rome depended on it, and when aqueducts broke, panic spread faster than plague. One old man mutters about how things were purer when he was young, that the aqueducts now carry lazy water. You nod politely, unsure what that means, but appreciating the poetry. He tells you about Numa's laws, the ancient rules forbidding anyone from polluting the city's springs or sacred fountains. Even the gods hate dirty water, he says. You believe him. In a place where everything smells slightly fermented, clean water might as well be divine. You sit by the edge of the fountain, dipping your fingers into the cool stream. A woman beside you rinses her face, then whispers a short prayer to fauns, the spirit of springs. She sprinkles a few drops toward the east and sighs. You mimic her gesture, and for a moment, the water feels holy on your skin. Religion and hygiene blur together easily here. Wash your hands, cleanse your soul, maybe remove yesterday's garlic smell while you're at it. As you walk away, you pass a laundry stall where a couple of slaves pour water into vats mixed with lye and soapwort. The steam rises like a ghost. The scent of fresh water shifts again, now sharper, more caustic. They beat tunics against stones until white foam blooms across the surface. You think of the aqueduct's pristine beginnings and its gritty end in this alley of suds. Even miracles, you realize, get dirty eventually. You decide to follow one of the smaller aqueduct branches downhill. It leads you to a shaded courtyard where a handful of children splash in a shallow basin. Their laughter rings through the stone like bird calls. A nearby notice warns against bathing there, but rules bend easily when heat presses like a wet cloak. You smile. Cleanliness in Rome often came from joy as much as necessity. As the sun climbs, the marble gleams. The sound of dripping, trickling, gurgling surrounds you, a constant percussion of civic pride. Somewhere beneath your feet, hundreds of hidden pipes twist like metal roots, feeding fountains, baths, and even the emperor's private fish ponds. The system is alive, pulsing, but you can't help wondering how long it can last. Droughts, neglect, wars, each a slow clog in Rome's arteries. You find a quiet spot where one aqueduct arches high above a field. You climb a small ridge, place a hand against the cool stone, and listen. The faint echo of rushing water sounds like breath, steady, endless, slightly tired. It's strange to think that this, something so practical, became one of the wonders of the world. But maybe that's what Rome did best, turn necessity into spectacle. As evening nears, you return toward the city's heart, the smell of wet dust rising underfoot. The fountains glow in lamplight now, the same water you touched this morning spilling out like liquid gold. You can hear people chatting, laughing, splashing, using the fountains not just as sources of hygiene, but as gathering spots, Rome's first water coolers, quite literally. You dip your hand again and smile. It's not pure, not perfect, but it's enough. Enough to clean, to cool, to connect a million lives under one thirsty sky. You lift a drop to your lips, and it tastes faintly of stone and sunlight. Ancient refreshment with a side of lead. Rome's version of sparkling water. Tomorrow, you'll follow that same water into the bathhouses, where cleanliness becomes theater and gossip mixes with steam. But tonight, as the aqueduct hums softly in the dark, you feel strangely grateful for every drop. Rome's beauty, you realize, was never about purity. It was about flow. You wake again with sunlight pouring through the shutters, golden and dusty, and today feels like a bathing day. You follow the steady murmur of the street until you reach the familiar marble facade of the neighborhood thermae, one of the smaller public bathhouses scattered like little lungs throughout the city. The Romans built hundreds of these, great and small, some so opulent they could swallow entire city blocks, others wedged between bakeries and wine shops, smelling faintly of both. You step through the wide doorway, greeted first by warmth, then by the oddly soothing echo of voices and water. Inside, the air shimmers. The sound is constant, splashes, laughter, the occasional argument about politics or philosophy. The place breathes. A few people glance your way, But no one pays too much attention. Bathing in Rome isn't private or shy. It's routine, communal, and sometimes political. The emperor himself might show up to bathe among the people, pretending to be approachable, while attendants fanned him with palm leaves. You hand a coin to the balneater, the attendant at the door, who nods toward the changing area. The apoditarium smells of olive oil, sweat, and wet leather sandals. Rows of cubbies line the walls, each carved with a small number. You strip down, a little self-conscious, and tuck your belongings away, hoping the slaves who watch over them aren't also moonlighting as pickpockets. Theft here was so common that Romans sometimes hired personal guards just to watch their tunics while they bathed. The floor under your bare feet is warm, heated by a network of clay pipes called the hypocaust. Hot air from furnaces below moves through these hollow spaces, keeping the floors and pools pleasantly toasty. It's one of those ingenious inventions that makes you realize, even 2,000 years ago, comfort was already a science. The Romans didn't invent the spa, but they industrialized it. You step into the tepidarium first, the warm room where your body begins to adjust. The walls are painted with faded murals, sea gods, dolphins, and women pouring jugs of water. The air feels soft, dense. A trickle of sweat slides down your temple. And you can't tell if it's from the heat or the sheer beauty of the room. Everything glows slightly golden. The next chamber, the caldarium, is hotter. Steam fogs your vision instantly. You move carefully, feeling for the lip of the pool with your toes. The water here is deep and embraces you like liquid velvet. Around you, people chat lazily, scraping sweat and oil from their arms, discussing grain prices or theater scandals. The baths are less about hygiene and more about belonging. This is where business deals happen, where poets find inspiration, where gossip ripples faster than the water itself. You sit at the pool's edge, watching an older man being massaged by a slave with surprising ferocity. The man groans in half pain, half pleasure. The masseur uses olive oil mixed with crushed herbs, rosemary, thyme, maybe even ground seashells for exfoliation. You're tempted to try it, though you suspect it's like being sandpapered politely. Historians still argue whether the baths actually made people cleaner. After all, everyone shared the same pools, the same strigils, sometimes even the same towels. The hot air must have killed some bacteria, but the human soup effect probably undid the rest. One scholar once joked that the baths were equal parts luxury and petri dish. You smile at the thought and sink a little deeper, letting the warmth lull your skepticism. A young man beside you starts humming, a slow, tuneless melody that blends with the dripping water. He tells you he comes here every day, even if it means skipping lunch. "Better hungry than dirty," he says proudly. You nod, admiring his priorities. For many Romans, daily bathing wasn't optional. It was civilization itself. To skip it was barbaric, a betrayal of everything Rome claimed to stand for. You move to the frigidarium, the cold plunge. The water is shockingly clear, almost blue, and cold enough to make your heart hiccup. You step in cautiously, then all at once, gasping as goosebumps bloom across your arms. Every muscle tightens, and for a brief, thrilling second, you feel utterly awake. This is how Romans closed their ritual: heat, scrape, cool. It's both science and sensation, an ancient version of contrast therapy your modern wellness influencers would sell for $200 an hour. You climb out, shivering slightly but grinning. Around you, attendants refill oil flasks, sweep water from the marble floors, and light more incense near the altars to Hygiene, goddess of health. You rub your arms dry with a cloth that smells faintly of lye. There's something deeply human about the rhythm of all this, the repetition, the chatter, the blend of vanity and vulnerability. In the corner, a philosopher is holding court literally in a towel, lecturing about the moral decay of luxury, while someone offers him more scented oil. Hypocrisy has a long shelf life, apparently. You pretend to listen, nodding occasionally, but your mind drifts toward the practical. Who first thought this was a good idea? To gather strangers, strip them down, and tell them they'd emerge purified. Maybe it wasn't hygiene that drove it, but loneliness. In a city this crowded, the baths gave everyone a place to belong, a warm pause in the constant march of noise and labor. You wander through the corridors, steam curling around your ankles, until you reach a small side chamber with trickling fountains. Here, a few bathers sit silently, eyes closed, letting droplets fall from ceiling pipes onto their shoulders. It's meditative. You join them for a moment, the water tapping a slow rhythm on your neck. Somewhere outside, the city clatters, but in here, it's just hush and heartbeat. As you dry yourself one last time, you notice a small inscription scratched into the marble wall. He who bathes often will live long and smell decent. You chuckle, probably graffiti from a poet who found inspiration between rinses. You run your fingers over the words, still damp, and realize that for all the discomfort, there's something deeply soothing about being part of this ritual. Outside, the sunlight feels softer. You walk through the bathhouse doors clean, or at least Roman clean, and back into the swirl of street smells you met on your first night. The contrast is immediate. You smell fish, sweat, bread, smoke. But now, beneath it all, there's a faint, lingering note of lavender oil on your skin. Civilization in one layer of scent. You glance back once. Steam rises from the roof vents like breath. Inside, more people are arriving. Merchants, laborers, mothers with children. The baths never really rest. They're Rome's lungs, exhaling heat and inhaling humanity. You start walking, your sandals slapping against the wet cobbles, thinking about how every drop of that bath water came through an aqueduct you traced yesterday. Cleanliness here isn't individual, it's collective, a shared illusion. Yet somehow, that illusion keeps the city alive. You've just stepped out of the frigidarium, skin tingling, breath sharp. The morning light outside is pale and almost kind, but your curiosity lingers like the oil on your arms. You remember watching people in the tepidarium rubbing themselves with bronze blades, strigils, they called them. It looked both ridiculous and oddly satisfying. You decide that today you'll try it. So you find a small vendor stall tucked behind the bathhouse where a man sells everything from combs to glass perfume bottles to slightly used strigils. He waves one in your direction, polished and curved like a crescent moon. Best quality, he says, which probably means dropped only once in the drain. You hand him a coin, because curiosity always wins over common sense. The tool feels heavier than you expected, cool against your palm. The edge dull, but confident. You follow the narrow alley toward a small training yard where some bathers practice scraping in the sun. A slave pours olive oil over your shoulders, warm, thick, and faintly grassy. The smell makes you think of kitchens, not cleanliness. You spread it across your arms and chest, and for a moment, you're glistening like a marble statue. A passing dog pauses to sniff approvingly, Then comes the scrape. You drag the strigil along your forearm, and immediately a line of brownish film curls up like eraser shavings. Oil, dust, sweat, and perhaps the ghost of yesterday's stew. It's both disgusting and mesmerizing. You try again, longer this time, the edge sliding across your skin with a soft shh sound. Around you, others do the same, turning personal hygiene into a kind of symphony. Scrape, sigh, splash. It's not exactly pleasant, but it's strangely meditative. The oil softens everything, and the strigil doesn't hurt unless you get ambitious. You start to see why Romans loved this ritual. No soap, no lather, just oil and friction. Ancient exfoliation therapy. They claimed it removed impurities and strengthened the body, though you suspect it was mostly an excuse to justify endless supplies of olive oil. Historians still argue whether the Romans actually believed oil cleaning was superior, or whether soap was simply too expensive to waste on bodies. Some fragments suggest that soap was known, especially in the northern provinces, but in Rome itself it was a barbarian novelty. The civilized way, the Roman way, was to shimmer like a salad dressing and then scrape it all off. You grin, imagining some Gallic visitor whispering, "Have you tried just using soap?" and being shunned for life. After the scraping, an attendant offers you a small cloth soaked in rosewater. You dab it across your neck, savoring the coolness, and realize that the scent of sweat has been replaced by something oddly floral. Maybe that's the point. Clean isn't necessarily sterile, it's theatrical. You've turned your skin into a scented billboard of respectability. A group of men nearby are comparing strigils, one bronze, one silver, one gilded, and obviously impractical. They gossip while scraping, tossing in comments about the latest chariot races. The talk shifts easily between sports, politics, and whose oil mixture produces the best glow. You listen, amused. Hygiene here doubles as networking. One man claims that gladiators rub down with oil mixed with fine sand for better muscle tone. Another insists he adds wine to his for anti-aging. You're not sure it works, but you admire the confidence. You take another pass across your back and nearly drop the tool. The scraping noise is oddly loud, like a tiny violin played by someone with bad intentions. A child nearby giggles at your grimace. "You'll get used to it," he says. "My father says if it doesn't sting, you're not doing it right." You're not sure whether to thank him or call for a medic. An older woman passes by with a strigil that looks more like an heirloom than a tool. She's methodical, slow, scraping in long, even strokes. When she finishes, her skin gleams. She smiles and tells you that in her youth, noble women competed to see whose strigil could collect the most impressive mix of oil and dust. A bizarre sort of beauty contest judged by grime. You can't tell if she's joking. Rome blurs the line between vanity and endurance so casually that it's hard to know where one ends. As you clean the strigil with a cloth, you notice small pits of corrosion on the metal. The vendor wasn't lying when he said slightly used. You shrug. Hygiene is never spotless, even in the pursuit of cleanliness. Next, you wander toward the gymnasium attached to the bath complex. The air smells of leather, oil, and ego. Athletes wrestle in pairs, glistening, slippery, impossible to separate. After each bout, they scrape one another's backs with strigils, laughing as the blades squeak. A few drop their used oil-sweat mixture into a jar, which, horrifyingly, a merchant later collects to sell as a skincare ointment. Yes, you heard that right. Used athlete oil. The Romans called it gloios, and some believed it had healing powers. You stare in disbelief, then decide to never buy Roman cosmetics again. Historians still debate whether Gloios was actually medicinal or just an early marketing scam. Maybe both. The ancients loved a good placebo, and who could resist owning a jar labeled Essence of Champion? You wonder if somewhere out there an emperor rubbed it on his elbows and called it divine strength. When you're done, you rinse under a trickling fountain, the oil replaced by a faint sheen of pride and the tiniest rash. The slave who helped you earlier hands back your tunic, which now feels lighter against clean skin. You catch your reflection in the water, a little red, a little smug, definitely shinier than before. You start walking back through the bath's courtyard, passing a small mosaic that shows a man scraping himself with exaggerated grace. Beneath it, a Latin caption translates roughly to, "Cleanliness is half of health." You think about that while watching another bather sneeze into the pool, maybe more like 1/3 on a good day. Outside, the heat of midday presses down. You can feel your pores already reconsidering the whole effort. A cart rattles by, splashing water from a nearby drain onto your legs. You sigh but laugh anyway. The city has its own sense of humor. It cleans you up just to dirty you again. You pass a perfume seller's stall and pause. He waves a vial of myrrh oil under your nose, promising the scent of a senator. You're tempted to ask if it comes with scandal, but you just smile and walk away. Rome's hygiene is never just about staying clean. It's about smelling like someone important enough not to have to scrape themselves. As you stroll down the sunlit street, you realize your skin feels different, not just smoother but oddly alert. Maybe the strigil worked after all, or maybe it's just the pleasure of participation, of doing what millions did before you. Scrape, rinse, repeat. The city runs on ritual, and now you're part of it, shiny, slightly stung, and smelling faintly of olives. You wander further through the maze of Rome's morning streets, feeling lighter, shinier, maybe a little over-oiled. The air is thick again, smoke from cook fires, donkey sweat, and somewhere the sour, sweet bite of the city's most unavoidable institution, the public latrine. You follow your nose down a shaded alley until the unmistakable echo of running water and chatter draws you in. The doorway opens into a long stone chamber that's somehow both elegant and horrifying. A row of marble benches lines each wall, punctuated by perfectly circular holes spaced with suspicious intimacy. You take a cautious step forward. Beneath the seats, water murmurs in a shallow channel, constantly flowing toward the sewer. Another smaller stream runs just in front of the benches, where a handful of people are rinsing something on sticks. You already suspect what that something is, but you're not emotionally prepared for confirmation. Welcome to the Roman latrine, communal, efficient, and about as private as a team meeting. You take a seat on the far end, trying not to make eye contact with your neighbor, who greets you cheerfully and keeps chatting as if this were a cafe. That's the first surprise. Nobody's embarrassed. The Romans didn't hide away for their bathroom business. Hygiene was social. Conversation passed the time while everything else, well, passed naturally. Your neighbor gestures toward the little gutter running along the floor. For the spongia, he explains. You nod, pretending you know what that means, until he lifts one for demonstration. A wooden stick topped with a sea sponge. You feel your stomach drop faster than the contents of the sewer beneath you. He dips it in the front gutter, rinses it in the trickling water, and sets it back beside the bench. Communal sponge, shared between users, washed in the same stream that never quite looks clean. You stare at it like it's a mythical monster. Historians still argue whether the spongia was truly communal or if bathers brought their own. Some suggest that respectable citizens carried personal sponges in little leather pouches, Rome's version of BYO hygiene. Others believe that most people just trusted the rinse and went on faith. Either way, you're suddenly grateful for the existence of modern toilet paper and germ theory. The air here is surprisingly fresh thanks to clever Roman engineering. A series of vents cut into the walls draw air upward, while running water keeps things moving below. The famous Cloaca Maxima, the Great Drain, lies somewhere beneath your feet, one of the oldest and most impressive sewage systems in the world. Built centuries before Caesar's birth, it still hums with the constant flush of Rome's collective life. You picture it now, a vast underground artery carrying away the evidence of daily existence. The city above shines because the one below never sleeps. A young attendant walks by sprinkling a mixture of crushed herbs and charcoal near the drains. You catch the scent of mint and rue, primitive air fresheners meant to mask the inevitable. It helps a little. You take another cautious breath, counting your blessings that Roman dining schedules didn't coincide with peak latrine hours. A man in the corner tells a story about how Emperor Vespasian once taxed urine collection. You perk up. How does that even work? He explains that urine, rich in ammonia, was valuable to fullers who used it to whiten togas. Collectors placed jars along the street for people to relieve themselves into, then sold the contents to laundries. When Vespasian decided to tax that trade, his son Titus complained that it was beneath imperial dignity. The emperor supposedly held up a coin and said, "Pecunia non olet." Money doesn't stink. You chuckle. Leave it to Rome to monetize bodily functions. You shift a little on the cold marble seat. There's no divider, no modesty panel, just eye contact and conversation. Two men argue about the upcoming games while one gestures enthusiastically with the same hand he just used for, you know? You stare straight ahead, counting the tiles in the mosaic floor. It's beautifully made, blue and white tesserae forming dolphins and waves, as if the artist wanted to remind you that water is cleansing, even down here. A drop from the ceiling splashes onto your shoulder. You try not to think about where it came from. One of the attendants laughs softly. "Just condensation," he says. You nod too quickly, deciding to believe him because the alternative would ruin your day. There's a strange comfort in how normal this is for everyone else. People hum, gossip, even read scraps of parchment. The sound of running water fills the gaps in conversation, turning the space into something oddly rhythmic. For a civilization obsessed with order, this feels chaotic, but efficient. Nobody lingers longer than necessary, yet nobody rushes. It's a balance born from centuries of shared routine. You glance down the line and notice that some benches are marked with initials, personal favorites or unofficial reservations perhaps. One has a carved fish symbol, another a heart. You resist the urge to ask about it. There are conversations best left unspoken, even in Rome. A breeze drifts through the high window, and sunlight catches on a faint mist above the water channel. You imagine the Tiber again, downstream, carrying away everything you and a million others contributed to the system. The same river that bathers, laundresses, and bakers all rely on. It's a circle, unhygienic, yes, but somehow sustainable. Historians still debate how well the sewers truly worked. Some claim the flow was constant and efficient. Others insist they clogged regularly, creating underground lagoons of unspeakable sludge. Archaeologists have found both pristine channels and disaster zones filled with centuries-old deposits. Whatever the truth, you're grateful you can leave this chamber soon. You rise carefully, rinse your hands in a small basin of water mixed with ash, an ancient equivalent of soap. It leaves your skin gritty, but smelling faintly cleaner. Beside you, someone cracks a joke about Jupiter's thunder sounding just like the latrine drains after rain. Laughter echoes against the stone, strangely cheerful. You smile despite yourself. As you step outside, the sunlight hits you like a blessing. The noise of the marketplace floods in, bright and ordinary. You breathe deep, grateful for open air and distance. Behind you, the murmur of the latrine continues, steady as Rome's heartbeat. It's not glamorous, but it's civilization, the unfiltered kind that keeps empires running. You glance back once more at the carved archway above the door. Someone has chiseled a phrase there, almost invisible now. What enters clean must not linger. You laugh softly, shaking your head. The Romans even gave philosophy to their plumbing. As you rejoin the street, the scent of fresh bread and olive oil replaces the memory of marble benches. You think about how comfort depends on perspective. To them, it was progress. To you, it's a cautionary tale. Still, the next time you see a public restroom sign, you might whisper a little "Gratias tibi ago," thank you, to the ancient engineers who dared to make it communal. Because now you know, even in Rome's most awkward corners, hygiene wasn't a luxury. It was teamwork. You stroll back into the sunlight, your stomach reminding you it's time to eat. But something pungent distracts you before you find the nearest thermopolium. It's not the sweet tang of garum this time. It's sharper, sour, unmistakably ammoniac. The smell rolls down the alley like a warning. You turn a corner and discover the source. A Follonica, one of Rome's laundries. From the outside, it looks like any workshop. Wide doorway, buckets, the hiss of boiling water. But the closer you step, the more your nose protests. Inside, rows of shallow tubs line the floor, filled with pale yellow liquid that foams slightly in the heat. A man stands in one of them barefoot, lifting and stomping bundles of cloth like he's crushing grapes. Only he's not making wine. He's treading in urine. You hesitate in the doorway. The fuller glances up and waves cheerfully. "Fresh batch," he shouts over the splash. "Collected last night." His grin suggests he's proud of that fact. You manage a nod, trying not to breathe too deeply. Here, laundry is alchemy. Urine, rich in ammonia, is prized for its whitening power. The fullers buy it from collectors who set jars on street corners and in public latrines, waiting for contributions. You picture a line of people relieving themselves into amphorae labeled "for the laundry only," and nearly laugh. Leave it to Rome to turn bodily waste into detergent. Historians still argue how common the practice really was. Some say every Follonica relied on urine. Others claim only cheaper laundries used it, while finer houses preferred imported lye. But the evidence, chemical residues, ancient graffiti, complaining of the smell, leans in favor of pea power. The Emperor Vespasian certainly thought so when he taxed the trade. "Money doesn't stink," he said, though his laundries certainly did. You edge closer, curious despite yourself. The fuller stomps rhythmically, twisting and pounding a tunic until it turns a shade lighter. He then rinses it in clear water, wrings it, and lays it across a wooden frame to dry in the sun. Another worker brushes the fabric with a stick, wrapped in thorns to fluff the fibers. The result is surprisingly soft considering its journey. In one corner, an apprentice mixes clay, ash, and soda into a thick paste. Rome's version of detergent for tougher stains. He scoops a handful and scrubs at a wine blotch on a toga, muttering to himself. The texture looks gritty, like wet chalk, and the smell, somewhere between burnt wood and fermented lemons, isn't exactly luxurious, but it works. You can almost see the stain fade beneath his hands. You ask if they ever use soap. The fuller laughs, loud and genuine. Soap, he says. That's for barbarians up north. We use the emperor's own gift. He gestures grandly toward a line of jars against the wall, each labeled with the name of a public latrine. Capitoline Hill Finest Blend, one reads. You decide not to ask for details. The heat inside the shop is unbearable. The mixture of wet fabric, steam, and ammonia stings your eyes. You step back toward the doorway, gulping fresh air that now tastes faintly metallic in comparison. Still, the process fascinates you. Rome's cleanliness runs on contradiction. Dirty methods for clean results, foul smells for fresh clothes. Outside, a slave carries a basket of newly washed togas toward the forum, the bright fabric gleaming almost unnaturally white. You can smell them from meters away, not unpleasant exactly, just unmistakably laundered. The scent of civic pride, perhaps. A man wearing one of those togas later will stride through the crowd, admired for his spotless dignity, unaware that he smells faintly of last week's tax revenue. You follow the fuller to a back courtyard where rows of garments hang on wooden poles. Beneath them, vats of chalky powder sit open, fuller's earth, a fine clay used for final polishing. He sprinkles it over the damp fabric like a chef seasoning his masterpiece, then brushes it off once dry. The result? A soft sheen that almost glows in the sunlight. Cleanliness, it seems, is more illusion than purity. Nearby, another worker heats sulfur over a brazier, producing thick white smoke that curls around the fabrics. To brighten them, he explains when he sees your puzzled face. Kills bugs, too. You nod, though your lungs disagree. The smoke smells like rotten eggs, but the togas emerge whiter than marble. You imagine senators preening in these garments, oblivious to the noxious artistry behind them. Historians still debate how dangerous this process was. Prolonged exposure to ammonia and sulfur dioxide could scar lungs, but slaves and laborers rarely had the luxury of worrying about such things. Life in a Phalonica meant constant irritation, eyes watering, skin raw, hands permanently pruned. Yet the demand for spotless clothes never waned. Rome's elite equated whiteness with virtue. The brighter your toga, the cleaner your soul, at least in theory. You lean against the wall, watching a young apprentice wring out a tunic and hang it beside the others. He hums under his breath, cheerful despite everything. Maybe that's the secret. When filth is your daily companion, you stop resenting it. You learn to turn it into livelihood, even pride. A passerby pauses outside, pinching his nose. Smells like profit, the fuller calls out. And everyone laughs. The joke is old but timeless. You find yourself grinning too. There's something perversely admirable about this. Humans transforming waste into worth, persistence into progress. As you leave, you notice a small shrine near the doorway, a clay figurine of Minerva, goddess of crafts, flanked by two tiny amphorae. Offerings of lavender sprigs lie at her feet. You whisper a quiet thanks for the worker's lungs and sanity, then step back into the sun. The breeze outside feels miraculous. You inhale deeply, only to catch the distant scent of another Folonica down the block. There's no escaping it. Rome's air is half bread, half ammonia. You start walking uphill, watching people carry freshly washed garments through the streets, proud as if displaying art. You can't help but chuckle. Civilization's wardrobe powered by public urinals. Still, it worked. Without these laundries, Rome's marble-white image might have dulled centuries earlier. The contrast between dirty means and clean ends feels almost poetic, like the city itself, constantly polishing its rough edges while hiding the stains beneath. As the sun sets, the laundry's steam rises into the orange sky, merging with cooking smoke and the faint, sweet scent of olive presses. You pause to watch. The rooftops shimmer, the streets hum, and somewhere beneath it all, a fuller stamps rhythmically in his vat, keeping Rome immaculate, one stomp at a time. You take one last breath of that sharp, acrid perfume, the smell of civilization's strangest cleanliness, and continue down the hill toward quieter streets, ready to learn what Romans did for their smiles next. You head downhill, following the chatter of vendors and the faint clinking of glass jars. The air shifts again, from ammonia's bite to something chalkier, faintly herbal. It's not perfume, not quite medicine. You stop before a small shop wedged between a bakery and a barber's stall. The sign above the doorway shows a smiling tooth carved in relief, slightly menacing, like it knows secrets you don't. You step inside. The space is narrow, stacked with shelves holding jars of crushed herbs, powdered pumice, and bundles of dried twigs tied neatly with string. A young attendant greets you with a grin that could double as a cautionary tale. His teeth are the color of weathered parchment, his gums receding like a retreating army. "Looking to brighten your smile?" he asks cheerfully. You nod, because curiosity once again wins over reason. Romans, you quickly learn, cared deeply about fresh breath and white teeth, even if their methods would horrify your dentist. They chewed aromatic sticks, rinsed with vinegar or wine, and brushed using powders made from everything from oyster shells to powdered bones. The shopkeeper scoops a bit of white dust onto his fingertip and offers it to you. "Finest blend," he promises, "crushed mouse bones and salt." You manage a polite smile and pretend to rub a speck on your teeth while trying not to gag. Historians still argue about how effective Roman dental care really was. On one hand, skeletons show surprisingly little decay, perhaps because diets were low in sugar. On the other, enamel erosion and gum disease were common. Some even claim urine-based mouthwash was used for whitening, imported all the way from Portugal, prized for its purity. You don't need to be a scholar to know that's one export you'd rather not sample. The attendant demonstrates another technique, chewing on a twig from the Salvadora persica tree, known now as the toothbrush tree. He gnaws the end until it frays, then rubs it along his teeth in tiny circles. "See," he says proudly, "keeps the mouth fresh." You nod, though the results appear debatable. He offers you one for a small coin. You take it. If nothing else, it smells pleasantly woody, with a hint of mint. You step outside again, chewing on the twig as you walk. The taste is bitter at first, but grows oddly refreshing. Maybe there's something to it. You imagine noble women doing the same, perhaps between sips of wine or bites of figs, their jewels flashing as they pretend they're not scraping tartar. Cleanliness, in Rome, always comes with an audience. You pass another stall where a barber is trimming a customer's beard. His tools, bronze razors, tweezers, and something resembling pliers, gleam in the sun. He catches your glance and waves a small bundle of toothpicks. "For the after-meal glow," he calls. You take one, testing it carefully. The wood splinters, but does the job. Somewhere, a poet would later write that a person's moral purity could be judged by how cleanly they pick their teeth. Rome, you realize, never missed a chance to moralize hygiene. Further down the street, a group of school children walk past, laughing. One holds a sprig of mint and chews it, breathing theatrically into his friend's face. Breath-freshening contests, apparently. Aren't modern inventions? You grin at the thought. Some things never change. You pause near a fountain, swirling a mouthful of water. It tastes faintly metallic, but cooler than wine. For centuries, people believed vinegar rinses could cure bad breath and strengthen gums. You swish once and nearly cough. It burns like acid, but your mouth does feel cleaner, if also mildly punished. Romans must have had tongues of steel. Historians still debate what ingredients went into Roman toothpastes. Recipes survive. One calls for honey, powdered glass, and crushed myrrh, another for pumice, ashes, and pepper. The logic seems to be that if it hurts, it's probably working. You imagine senators with bleeding gums declaring victory over plaque. The irony, many such mixtures likely did more harm than good, grinding enamel away one proud brushing at a time. A woman at the next fountain dips her finger into a small bronze box and starts rubbing a paste onto her teeth. The smell of mint and wine wafts your way, pleasant until she spits a streak of pink foam into the gutter. She smiles at you proudly, lips stained red. "See," she says, "just like pearls." You nod, thinking they look more like coral, but you're not about to argue. There's a quieter side to all this, too. Romans believed bad breath was a sign of moral weakness, even spiritual decay. Poets mocked lovers for halitosis. Philosophers warned that foul speech comes from a foul mouth. You can almost hear the city whispering judgments as people talk too close in the marketplace. Breath wasn't just hygiene, it was reputation. You wander toward a small apothecary on a corner where bundles of dried herbs hang from the ceiling. Sage, thyme, lavender. The apothecary greets you with a sly smile. For a true Roman smile, he says, you must balance heat and moisture in the mouth. He grinds a mixture of salt, myrrh, and crushed oyster shell, stirring it into a paste with honey. He hands you a dab on a spoon. You hesitate, then taste it. It's gritty, sweet, and numbing all at once. Strangely effective. Don't swallow, he warns, or you'll taste the sea all day. He tells you that sailors bring back exotic resins from the east, frankincense and myrrh, which the wealthy add to their dental powders. The poor make do with ashes and mint. Clean mouth, clean heart, he says, sealing a small jar with wax. At least that's what the poets want you to think. Outside again, you pass a young couple sharing a laugh over a clay cup of wine. She leans close, sniffing his breath approvingly. And he preens like a rooster. The city hums around them, vendors shouting, fountains splashing, someone singing a tune about love and olives. You take another chew on your twig and grin. If hygiene here is awkward, at least it's democratic. Everyone, rich or poor, wants to smell acceptable in conversation distance. As you head back toward the forum, the afternoon sun glints off bronze mirrors in shop windows. You catch your reflection and flash a smile, slightly wider. Maybe imagination, maybe victory. Either way, you're content. Your mouth tingles faintly from the salt and herbs, and your breath smells like a herb garden gone rogue. Not bad for a city that launders with pee. Somewhere, A philosopher is writing about virtue again, comparing moral decay to dental neglect. You can almost hear him. A clean mouth is a clean mind. You snort softly. If that's true, Rome must be halfway to enlightenment, depending on how fresh the mint holds out. As you walk on, the breeze carries a mix of scents: wine, smoke, herbs, humanity, and your senses begin to merge them all into a single note: life, imperfect, inventive, and endlessly trying to smell better than it is. The next morning finds you standing before a mirror made of polished bronze, squinting at your reflection. Your teeth, at least, are holding up, chalky and mildly shiny, but the rest of you looks like you've been living in a dust storm. A woman passing by glances at you and laughs softly. "You need pulvis candidus," she says, pointing at your face, the powder of beauty. Lead white. You follow her into a cosmetic stall draped in gauzy linen to block the sun. The smell inside is part perfume, part paint. Rows of small jars line the counter: ground minerals, oils, and unidentifiable pastes. The vendor, a man with suspiciously rosy cheeks, greets you with the kind of charm that usually comes before regret. He scoops a dab of pale powder from a jar and smooths it across his own cheek. "See," he says, turning his face toward the light. "Smooth, divine, youthful?" He doesn't mention that lead white seeps through the skin, dulling the nerves and slowly poisoning its devotees. You smile politely, deciding not to point out the tremor in his hands. Still, there's fascination in the ritual. Rome's beauty culture runs on contradiction. Everyone wants to look fresh from a bathhouse, but also pale enough to prove they don't labor under the sun. You watch as women and men dab white powder on their cheeks, then tint their lips with crushed cinnabar. A faint shimmer of malachite dust decorates their eyelids, and for a moment they glow like marble statues come to life. Historians still argue whether Romans knew about the dangers of lead-based cosmetics. Some claim ignorance, others insist they noticed, but preferred beauty over caution. After all, death by complexion was considered more elegant than living with blemishes. You lean closer to the table, catching the metallic scent beneath the rosewater. It smells faintly of danger and desire. The vendor offers you a jar of cerussa, the purest lead powder imported from Greece. He mixes it with a few drops of vinegar and olive oil, stirring until it becomes a creamy paste. "For the noble look," he says. You try a small streak across your wrist. It feels cool, smooth, and a little heavy. Almost immediately, your skin tingles. You decide you'll admire it for science, not longevity. Beside him, another customer is testing rouge made from red ochre and wine dregs. She dabs it on her cheeks, blending it with the white base. The effect is strangely theatrical, like living frescoes walking through the market. You remember how much Romans loved performance. Theater, rhetoric, ritual, even their hygiene was a kind of stage play. Outside the stall, you pass a young man using a small bronze spoon to remove excess oil from his forehead. He catches you watching and shrugs. "Better a little vanity than looking like a slave," he says. You can't argue. Status here is skin deep, and everyone's a curator of appearance. A bit of shine could ruin your reputation faster than bad poetry. You wander toward the public fountain again, watching reflections dance on the water. Women gather nearby to reapply their makeup, using the mirror-like surface as glass. They chat about which oils clog pores less in summer, whether Egyptian coal prevents eye infections or causes them. One claims it wards off the evil eye. Another swears it just makes her lashes thicker. Historians still debate whether coal truly protected against infections or merely symbolized purity. You suspect both might be true. One woman leans close to her reflection, dusting her nose with ground chalk. She looks serene until a breeze blows the powder into her eyes. She curses softly, then laughs, wiping tears and chalk streaks from her cheeks. Beauty's punishment, she mutters. You like her immediately. You continue down the street and find a perfume shop, a small oasis of sweetness amid the city's funk. Inside, amphorae of scented oils line the walls. Rose, myrrh, jasmine, cinnamon. The air is thick with layered fragrances, clinging to your skin even as you breathe. The shopkeeper explains how perfumes mask the odors of city life. Better to smell of roses than reality, he says with a wink. You can't argue with that logic. You test a drop of oil on your wrist. Warm, rich, faintly smoky. Syrian blend, he says proudly. For seduction and meetings with senators. You raise an eyebrow. And the difference? He grins. Mostly dosage. Perfume was hygiene in liquid form. Without modern soaps, scent became status. Romans even perfumed their pets and walls. You imagine entire bathhouses drenched in clouds of oil, people stepping out glistening like candles. The city must have smelled like a fever dream of flowers and sweat. Historians still argue about how common cosmetics were among men. Some claim only the effeminate used them. Others point to portraits of polished senators and perfumed generals. Appearances were power. Oiled skin meant leisure, which meant wealth. Dirt belonged to the poor. You realize that in Rome, hygiene isn't just cleanliness, it's politics, painted on the body. As you leave the perfume shop, you notice a beggar sitting nearby. His skin is raw from the sun, his hair matted, his nails black. Yet even he has a faint trace of oil on his neck, maybe from the bathhouse runoff, maybe from a generous stranger. The line between the perfumed and the unwashed is thinner than it seems. You drop a coin into his bowl and catch his grateful smile, a flash of human warmth no rouge could imitate. Walking back through the marketplace, you see a woman reapplying lead powder with a soft sponge. Her fingers tremble slightly. You wonder if she feels it yet, the slow numbness, the fatigue that never lifts. But she looks radiant, admired by everyone who passes. Maybe that's the real secret. Rome's hygiene isn't about health, but illusion, the art of seeming untouched by the world's grime. You catch your reflection again in a bronze shield for sale. The faint smear of cerussa on your wrist still gleams pale against your skin, a tiny Roman ghost haunting you. You wipe it off with your sleeve and decide that natural is your new luxury. But you can't help smiling. The Romans would have called you lazy for that. As the afternoon fades, the streets shimmer with heat and scent. Oils glisten on foreheads. Rouge melts into smiles, and the city smells like equal parts heaven and hazard. Somewhere, a poet will write about beauty's cost, maybe while coughing softly between verses, and you, walking through the haze of rose and lead, start to understand why Rome looked so flawless in marble. Because beneath the polish, everyone was quietly crumbling. You wake to the soft scrape of metal against skin, a faint rhythmic sound filtering through the shutters from the street below. Peeking out, you see a barber's stall already busy with customers. One man reclines while another leans forward, plucking stray hairs from his cheeks with brutal precision. The barber's toolkit glints in the early light. Tweezers, razors, and a small pot of wax simmering over coals. You realize you're about to witness Rome's other great obsession, smoothness. You wander down and join the small crowd of spectators, because here, personal grooming is public theater. The barber greets you with a nod. A trim, a pluck, a scrape, he offers, brandishing his tweezers like a gladiator's weapon. You politely decline for now, but stay to watch. The man in the chair doesn't flinch as hair after hair is tugged from his face. His expression is stoic, almost noble. No pain, no pietas, the barber jokes. You chuckle nervously, unsure if he's joking about virtue or vanity. In Rome, body hair carried meaning. Smoothness meant civilization. Fuzz meant barbarism. You glance at a passing legionary, clean-shaven, arms gleaming under the sun. Soldiers were expected to maintain tidy appearances even on campaign, shaving as often as they sharpened their swords. A hairy soldier is a lazy one, an old general once said. Rome's empire was built as much on grooming habits as discipline. Historians still argue whether this fixation came from practicality or fashion. Some claim it began as hygiene, lice prevention during campaigns, while others trace it to Greek aesthetics, the ideal of the hairless athlete carved in marble. Whatever the reason, it became law by culture. Smooth was civilized. You run a self-conscious hand along your arm, feeling the faint grit of stubble that would have doomed you to side-eye from every senator's wife. The barber finishes with a flourish, smearing scented oil over the man's jaw. "Smell like victory," he says, grinning. Then, turning to you, he dips a wooden spatula into the warm wax pot. "Try the Roman way," he urges. Before you can protest, he dabs a strip along your forearm. The heat surprises you, not unbearable, but definite. Then comes the quick rip. You yelp in a whisper, earning laughter from onlookers. "Bravery begins in the skin," the barber declares. You glance at your reddened arm and wonder if bravery's overrated. He hands you a small jar of pumice dust. "For polishing," he explains. You rub a pinch between your fingers. It's like fine sand, slightly gritty. Romans used it for smoothing everything, skin, nails, even teeth. You dust it over the waxed patch on your arm, and the burn fades into a strange sort of satisfaction. The skin feels new, like it forgot what friction was. Nearby, a young woman leans over a mirror, plucking her eyebrows with tweezers the size of daggers. Her friend watches approvingly. "Symmetry is divine," she says. "Even Venus plucked." They argue briefly about the perfect brow shape, thick like statues or thin like painted goddesses. Fashion in Rome changes faster than bread prices, and everyone has an opinion. You try not to stare as another customer shouts, "Don't overpluck, you'll look Greek." The barber laughs so hard he nearly drops his razor. There's a deeper rhythm to it all. Scrape, wax, pluck, polish. Grooming isn't vanity here. It's a daily ritual of belonging. Every citizen participates, from slave to senator. The tools differ, but the motive is the same: to look in control. In a city of dirt and sweat, smoothness becomes armor. Historians still debate how widespread female depilation was. Some sources describe women removing body hair with pumice, resin, or a concoction of goat's fat and bat's blood. Yes, really. Others think that was literary exaggeration, ancient tabloid selling scandal. Either way, the result was the same: pain, patience, and the pursuit of perfection. The barber, noticing your curiosity, offers to show you something special. From beneath his table, he pulls a delicate bronze razor shaped like a dolphin. "From Pompeii," he whispers reverently, "before the ash fell." The blade still gleams. You hold it carefully, feeling the faint chill of history in your palm. This tiny object once touched someone's skin centuries ago, someone who, just like you, wanted to feel presentable before stepping into the world. He gestures toward a bowl of cloudy liquid. Aftercare, he says, olive oil, vinegar, and rose petals. You dip your fingers in and smooth it over the sore spot on your arm. The sting fades, replaced by a faint floral tang. The same mixture, he explains, can soothe razor cuts or bug bites. Multi-purpose beauty, Roman style. A young man enters, already stripped to the waist, asking for a full chest waxing before dinner. My lover prefers marble, he says simply. The barber nods without irony. Love, hygiene, and suffering have always been good companions. As you watch the wax spread and peel, you can't help marveling at the resilience behind the ritual. The city's grime may cling to every surface, but its people insist on polishing themselves anyway. Tiny acts of defiance against decay. Outside, the afternoon sun burns through the haze, and you step back into the street, still smelling faintly of rose vinegar. A breeze from the Tiber cools your skin, and for once, you feel lighter, cleaner, maybe. You pass a baker dusting flour off his arms and realize that even his motions mirror the barber's. Brush, wipe, perfect. Everyone in Rome, it seems, is always refining something. Their bread, their skin, their image. You turn a corner and spot a merchant selling small jars of depilatory cream. The label promises smooth limbs without fire. You raise an eyebrow. He assures you it's made from resin and donkey's milk, gentle as a goddess's touch. You sniff it. It smells like regret. You politely decline. As evening falls, the streets soften into gold, and shadows stretch long between the columns. You catch a reflection in a passing water trough, your face flushed, one arm conspicuously smoother than the other, and a faint sheen from the oil. You laugh quietly. Somewhere, a Roman poet would call this the glow of self-discipline. You just call it the price of curiosity. Still, you can't help admiring the dedication. Hygiene in Rome wasn't comfort. It was commitment. The skin, always scraped, plucked, and polished, became a map of endurance. You walk on, feeling the faintest breeze against the bare patch on your arm, and thinking, maybe there's wisdom in the madness, or at least excellent exfoliation. Laundry day again. You can tell because the whole neighborhood sounds like a drum line and smells faintly of lye, smoke, and sunshine. You follow the rhythmic whap, whap, whap of fabric against stone to a small courtyard where slaves and housewives stand ankle-deep in suds, rhythmically beating tunics that never seem to come clean enough. The air is heavy with soapwort, ash, and steam. You stand back a little. It's humid chaos. A woman bends over a wide basin, scooping handfuls of gray foam and slapping them onto a tunic stretched over a flat rock. Each strike sends droplets flying into the air, tiny rainbows forming in the sunlight. A boy beside her twists a sleeve around a pole and rings it with the seriousness of a philosopher. Romans took their clothes seriously. A spotless toga wasn't just laundry, it was status. And considering that most garments were wool or linen, each wash was a small act of courage. Wool shrank, linen frayed, dyes faded, but Rome expected perfection. You can almost hear the collective sigh of every house slave who ever tried to whiten a senator's toga after a muddy procession. Historians still argue about whether the Romans actually used soap as we know it. Some recipes from Gaul mention mixing tallow and ashes, primitive soap, but in the heart of Rome, the classics stuck to urine, lye, and muscle. You watch one man pour a ladle of thick, cloudy liquid, ammonia solution, courtesy of the nearest Polonica, into a wash tub. The smell hits like an insult, but the cloth does lighten almost instantly. Science before science. You kneel beside a small bucket where another woman is mixing ashes and water into a slippery gray paste. For the fine tunics, she explains, too delicate for trampling. She stirs with a wooden stick, the mixture bubbling faintly, as if alive. When she dips a garment in, the ash acts as lye, stripping oils and stains. You wonder if her hands burn? Probably. She shrugs when you ask, smiling. A little pain, a little whiteness, she says, which could be Rome's unofficial motto. In one corner, a group of men hang tunics on rope lines. The fabrics sway in the afternoon breeze, glowing pale gold in the sunlight. One laughs as another complains that his tunic is stiffer than parchment. That means it's clean, the first replies, tugging at his. You grin. Softness is for the rich, stiffness for the virtuous. Near the wall, a slave kneels beside a pot of boiling dye. The air shimmers with heat. He tosses a faded tunic into the mix, stirring it with a stick. The color deepens slowly from gray to a rich reddish brown. The scent of herbs, madder root maybe, floats through the steam. For the mistress, he explains, she says it hides stains better. You nod. Practicality disguised as fashion. A small girl runs past carrying a basket of clothespins carved from bone. She stops when she sees your curious stare. My father makes them, she says proudly. They hold like teeth. She demonstrates by clipping one to your sleeve, giggling when it pinches. Even here, amid the drudgery, there's joy in invention. Historians still debate how often Romans washed their clothes. Some sources suggest weekly, others only when absolutely necessary. Given the labor, both seem plausible. Imagine scrubbing tunics by hand, wringing them dry, then hauling them to rooftops to bleach in the sun. And yet they did tirelessly, because the line between clean and unclean wasn't just physical, it was moral. A dirty tunic implied laziness, a spotless one, respectability. You pick up a damp piece of linen and sniff cautiously. It smells faintly of smoke and earth, not unpleasant, just honest. The fabric feels coarse, roughened by countless washes. You realize how short its lifespan must be. Each cleaning eats away at the fibers. Cleanliness here carries a cost measured in threadbare edges. A man enters the courtyard carrying a small amphora. The whitening mix, he announces proudly. Inside sloshes a milky fluid, chalk suspended in water. He pours it over a pile of damp togas, the liquid dripping through like liquid marble. Makes the fabric shine, he says, so senators look pure even when they aren't. Everyone laughs. Rome's humor, like its laundry, is never subtle. You notice a row of garments laid flat on the ground, covered in translucent cloths. When you ask why, an older woman explains, to protect from dust while they dry. The gods hate dust. You look around at the city's constant swirl of grit and think the gods must be perpetually disappointed. One worker begins ironing, a strange sight in this world of stones and steam. She places a small bronze pan filled with hot coals over the wrinkles, pressing carefully. The smell of warm fabric fills the air. We call it the ferrum candens, she says proudly. It makes the linen behave. You watch her smooth a toga until it gleams like silk, smoke curling upward in lazy threads. A little later, a fuller arrives to inspect his client's finished garments. He rubs each between his fingers, sniffing and nodding. When he's satisfied, he tosses the workers a few coins. "Remember," he says, "the emperor likes his citizens clean." You glance toward the sky. Imperial policy meets civic deodorant. Even laundry is politics. Historians still argue whether the bleaching powders used by fullers damaged fabric over time. Some suggest the constant chemical treatment weakened threads, forcing Romans to buy new clothes sooner, a clever early form of economic stimulus. Others think they simply didn't care. As long as appearances stayed spotless, longevity was someone else's problem. As the sun dips lower, the courtyard takes on a golden haze. Clean garments sway above you, whispering in the breeze like the sails of a ghostly fleet. The rhythmic beating fades into quiet conversation and laughter. Someone brings out a loaf of bread and a jug of watered wine, passing them around. Even here, surrounded by the smell of ash and sweat, there's a strange peace. You dip your fingers into a bucket of rinse water, cloudy but cool, and splash your face. The lye stings faintly. You wipe your cheeks dry with a corner of cloth and catch a glimpse of yourself reflected in the basin. There's a smudge of chalk on your chin, a streak of ash on your sleeve. You look like part of the city now, washed, worn, but still standing. As you walk away, the scent of freshly laundered wool follows you down the alley, mingling with the sharper note of distant sulfur from the Fullonica. The sky over Rome glows like polished bronze. Somewhere, a philosopher is probably writing about purity while wearing a toga that just came out of one of those tubs. You smile at the irony, already looking forward to dirtying it all over again tomorrow. By now, you've seen the city wash its body, its clothes, and even its conscience. But sooner or later, all that scrubbing meets its greatest challenge, the kitchen. You follow the smell of wood smoke and sizzling oil toward an open-air stall where a woman fries fish in a bronze pan big enough to double as a shield. The air sparkles with grease and garlic. You can almost taste the salt before it hits your tongue. You take a seat on a stone ledge near her stall. The vendor nods, flips a piece of fish, and says, "Careful, oil bites back." The pan spits like an angry cat, spraying droplets onto her arm. She doesn't even flinch. Her hands are thick with callus, her tunic speckled with a constellation of old stains. She's the image of survival, fragrant and fearless. Romans loved food that smelled alive, vinegar, herbs, and the omnipresent garum, that fermented fish sauce that made everything taste like ambition. You spot a clay jar labeled "Best from Pompeii," and suddenly you're not so hungry. Still, the aroma is addictive, sharp, rich, salty. The Romans poured it on everything, meat, beans, even fruit. You take a tentative bite. The fish melts, the flavor blooms, and you understand instantly why garum ruled the empire's palate. But with flavor came filth. You glance around the cooking stall, smoke-blackened walls, flies in attendance, oil splattered on every reachable surface, yet for all the chaos, there's a rhythm here too, a ritual cleansing that happens between bites. The cook pauses to wipe her knife on a strip of linen, then dips her fingers into a small bowl of vinegar water. She swirls them, shakes off the droplets, and carries on. No soap, no fuss, just acidic instinct. Historians still argue whether Romans understood bacteria or simply feared the visible. They didn't know about microbes, but they did fear miasma, bad air thought to carry disease. Vinegar and wine were both disinfectant and deodorant in one. Even physicians prescribed hand washing with diluted wine before meals. The gods favor the clean-fingered, a proverb said. You can almost imagine a priest frowning at your greasy hands. You reach for your own portion of bread, tearing it open. The crust flakes apart, scattering crumbs onto your lap. Romans didn't use utensils much. Fingers were the true tools. Forks were for cooking, not eating, and spoons existed mostly for soups and desserts. Everything else was hand-delivered to the mouth, which meant, inevitably, that hands had to stay at least marginally respectable. A boy nearby hawks linen towels, thin, neatly folded, smelling faintly of lavender. For after meals, he calls. For hands. For honor? You buy one out of curiosity. It's rough, but surprisingly pleasant. When you wipe your fingers, the crumbs stick like memories. The boy grins. Now you look civilized, he says, as if you've just joined the Senate. Next to the food stall stands a small fountain, one of hundreds scattered through the city. People rinse their hands in its trickle before eating or after working. You do the same, the cool water stinging faintly where a drop of oil kissed your skin earlier. Two women beside you gossip while washing vegetables. The baths clean the body, one says, but kitchens test the soul. You smile. She's not wrong. The act of washing repeats everywhere. Cooks rinsing knives in vinegar, bakers splashing hands in floury water, street vendors wiping counters with olive-soaked rags. Cleanliness here is quick, improvised, and relentless. Rome eats with its fingers, but redeems itself with rinses. Historians still debate how much the average Roman cared about food hygiene. Evidence from sewers shows everything from cherry pits to rat bones, so standards were flexible. Some say vendors reused oil until it turned black. Others argue laws existed against selling spoiled goods. You suspect both are true. Rules on paper, reality on fire. As you eat, a stray dog noses your foot. You toss it a crumb, then watch as it darts off into the crowd. A group of soldiers nearby share a meal straight from a communal pot, scooping with bits of bread. One wipes his hands on his cloak. Another pours a splash of wine over his palms and laughs. For Jupiter's health, he says, licking his fingers. You resist the urge to offer him your lavender towel. The afternoon hum thickens with the scent of baked bread, roasted chickpeas, and honey cakes cooling on wooden racks. You follow the trail to a bakery where the air itself feels edible. The baker wipes sweat from his brow with a cloth, then dips his arms into a shallow basin before shaping another loaf. Clean hands make clean hearts, he mutters, repeating the same philosophy you've heard everywhere today. You wonder if it's true or just convenient branding for people who work with dough all day. Behind him, a slave scrubs the counter with a brush made from twigs and stiff horsehair. The bristles squeak against the wood. She dips the brush into ash water and repeats the motion until the surface gleams. Ash, again, Rome's miracle cleanser. It's everywhere, on floors, in hair, in kitchens. You start to suspect cleanliness here is just dirt rearranged with purpose. A gust of wind carries the smell of onions and grilled lamb from a nearby tavern. You drift toward it instinctively. Inside, the room glows amber with lamplight, filled with chatter and clinking cups. The tavern keeper hands you a bowl of stew and a cup of watered wine. You notice the cup rim is chipped, the bowl slightly greasy, but no one seems to mind. People eat heartily, laugh loudly, and dab their mouths with the same cloth they used on their hands. Shared hygiene, shared happiness. At the next table, a man tells a story about a philosopher who refused to eat with others because he claimed their fingers carried yesterday's sins. The room bursts into laughter. Then he died hungry, someone shouts. You grin. Even ancient moralists couldn't win against the lure of spiced lamb. When you finish your meal, you pour a little wine over your hands, a small ritual of thanks and tidiness, and wipe them dry on your towel. The motion feels oddly satisfying. Across the room, a musician strums a lyre, the melody drifting lazily through the smoke. It smells like bread, oil, and humanity, flawed, fragrant, and familiar. You step outside again, belly warm, fingers faintly sticky. You find a small fountain and rinse once more, watching the water swirl away bits of garlic and grain. It feels symbolic somehow, Rome washing itself one droplet at a time, never quite clean, but never surrendering to filth either. The evening breeze carries scents from every corner, wine from taverns, soapwort from laundries, incense from doorways. The city smells alive, like a giant kitchen after a feast, messy but satisfied. You smile, pat your stomach, and think, hygiene may be inconsistent here, but the flavor's unforgettable. By evening, the city quiets, but not peacefully. Somewhere in the distance, you hear the low murmur of coughing. The lamps along the streets burn faintly through a haze that smells of smoke, tallow, and something less defined, heavier. Rome's nights carry their own perfume, half dream, half infection. You find yourself walking toward the sick rooms, drawn by curiosity or empathy, or maybe just morbid fascination. The first sign of illness is always smell. A physician once wrote that you could diagnose a household by its odor before you even crossed the threshold. Tonight, you understand what he meant. Some homes exhale vinegar and herbs, families fighting the air itself, while others breathe rot and wet cloth. You wrap your sleeve across your nose, pretending it helps. You step into a modest domus, its atrium dimly lit by oil lamps. The air is dense, thick with smoke and boiled herbs. A woman sits beside a small brazier, tossing rosemary and bay leaves into the coals. The scent sharpens the air, almost masking the sickly sweetness that clings to the corners of the room. On a couch lies her husband, sweating, eyes half open. A clay bowl of water rests near his head, sprinkled with rose petals to cool the fever. You can tell it's doing little more than fragrance therapy. Historians still argue whether the Romans truly understood contagion. They feared miasma, bad air, as the root of disease, not invisible germs. Purification was about smell. Pleasant scents equaled health, foul odors equaled death. Doctors recommended incense, vinegar, or the burning of juniper to cleanse a room. You watch the woman wave a fan of woven reeds to stir the smoke. It keeps the evil air moving, she whispers. You nod because belief itself seems medicinal. In the corner, a slave grinds herbs with a mortar and pestle, myrrh, wormwood, and wine. The sound is slow, soothing, rhythmic. When he finishes, he pours the mixture into a bronze cup and hands it to the patient, who sips weakly. For the stomach, she explains, and for the spirits. You wonder which ailment matters more. You've noticed that every Roman household keeps a stockpile of remedies: garlic for infections, vinegar for wounds, honey for everything else. Honey, especially, is their miracle cure. The sticky gold heals burns, soothes throats, and sweetens medicine's bitterness. A physician named Galen even claimed honey could preserve flesh from decay. You glance at the bowl beside the patient's bed, a honeyed fig resting in water, and think, Maybe he's on to something. You step outside again to clear your head. The alley feels cleaner by comparison, even with its usual cocktail of smells. Across the street, a man hangs laurel wreaths over his doorway, a sign to ward off illness. A few neighbors cross themselves or mutter prayers to Apollo Medicus, the healing god. A woman pours a libation of wine onto the stones and whispers, "Keep the bad air away." The street flickers with the light of hundreds of small rituals, tiny defenses against the unseen. Historians still debate whether these practices were purely superstition or contained some accidental science. Many of the herbs burned, rosemary, sage, pine, do release antiseptic compounds when smoked. Vinegar's acidity kills bacteria. Rome, without knowing why, stumbled into half-truths that worked just enough to keep them trying. Further down the street, you pass a public bathhouse that's unusually quiet. The door is closed, a sprig of wormwood nailed to the lintel. Quarantine. Inside someone must be sick, maybe many. You pause, remembering yesterday's steam and laughter, the shared oil and strigils. Now those same waters could carry death. Communal hygiene had its price. You turn toward the temple of Aesculapius, the god of healing. It sits on Tiber Island, that thin stretch of stone floating between the city's two banks. The bridge creaks under your feet, the river's smell rising to meet you, mud, moss, faint decay. The island glows with torches and smoke from medicinal fires. Here, the city tries to quarantine its fears. You approach the temple steps. Priests move silently among the sick, carrying censers that trail sweet smoke. Incense curls through the air like visible breath. Some patients lie on mats, muttering prayers in fever dreams. Others simply sleep, too weak to move. You hear someone singing softly, a lullaby that sounds more ancient than hope. A priest notices you watching and gestures toward a marble basin filled with water and petals. "Wash," he says, "to keep the breath of the sick from clinging." You dip your hands in, the water cool and scented with laurel. For a moment, the act feels both practical and sacred. Maybe that's the heart of Roman hygiene, survival disguised as ceremony. As you wander the courtyard, you overhear a physician lecturing a small group of apprentices. "Disease is imbalance," he says. "Too much heat, too much cold, too much damp." He gestures to a chart showing the four humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, black bile. We treat by opposition. A fever needs cooling, a chill needs wine, a foul odor needs perfume. You can almost hear the logic humming beneath the superstition. They're not wrong, just incomplete. Nearby, a woman holds her child close, pressing a sprig of mint against his nose. "Breathe," she whispers. The boy's eyes flutter, his breath shallow but steady. You find yourself silently cheering for him, for her faith, for this city that keeps fighting rot with rosemary. As midnight nears, the air on the island thickens with incense and chanting. The priests move through the sick, sprinkling vinegar water with bundles of herbs. Each drop catches the lamplight like tiny stars. You watch them shimmer and fade against the darkness. It's beautiful and a little heartbreaking. Historians still debate how effective Roman medicine really was. Some dismiss it as guesswork, others see it as the root of modern hygiene. But standing here, breathing in rosemary smoke and hope, you realize effectiveness isn't the point. Faith, motion, ritual, these are the city's true disinfectants. You leave the temple quietly, the river whispering below. The stars tremble faintly above the haze, their light reflecting off the slow, dark water. Across the bridge, The city sleeps fitfully, half clean, half sick, wholly human. You pause at the edge and dip your fingers into the Tiber, washing away invisible worries. The water feels cold but alive. You whisper a small prayer you didn't know you knew, for breath to stay steady, for air to stay kind. Then you walk back into the city's warm pulse, surrounded by smoke, faith, and the stubborn will to stay alive. The next morning arrives soft and gray, the kind of light that makes marble look like skin. You're back near the baths, not to bathe this time, but to watch the crowd gather for something less hygienic and more divine. Between the steamy chambers and the flickering torches, small shrines cling to the walls like afterthoughts. Little faces carved in stone peer out from alcoves, Venus for beauty, Hygeia for health, Fortuna for everything else. Rome's obsession with cleanliness, it turns out, had as much to do with heaven as it did with hygiene. You linger near the entrance as a priest sprinkles rose water over a basin, chanting under his breath. The crowd murmurs in response. A young woman tosses a small cake into the brazier. A man pours a few drops of oil into the drain, watching it vanish into the earth. For good health, he says to no one in particular. The smell of burned honey drifts upward, mingling with the usual bathhouse steam. It hits you that the Romans didn't just wash their bodies, they washed their luck. Ritual purity was a kind of insurance policy, an invisible shield against chaos. Every cleansing act doubled as a prayer. You think back to last night's herbs on Tiber Island, the laurel wreaths over sickroom doors, and now this. Soap and sacrifice sharing the same marble floor. You follow the priest deeper inside. He pauses beside a small statue of Hygeia, daughter of Aesculapius. She holds a serpent coiled around a cup, its bronze eyes gleaming in the lamplight. A few bathers approach to touch the base of her pedestal, leaving behind small offerings, flowers, coins, even a tiny flask of scented oil. To keep the skin pure, one woman whispers. You can't help smiling. The goddess must have quite the skincare clientele. Historians still argue whether these rituals were truly religious or just cultural habit dressed in piety. Were Romans genuinely worshiping cleanliness, or were they simply indulging superstition to feel safer in a dirty world? The evidence blurs. Graffiti near bathhouse shrines mixes prayers with jokes. One carving reads, "I washed here and met the gods. One of them stole my sandals." Faith and humor never bathe separately. In the central hall, the air is thicker than ever. Incense smoke drifts upward in lazy spirals, twisting around the marble pillars like ghosts in no hurry. You hear laughter from the tepidarium. The baths are already filling. Yet the boundary between worship and wash day feels invisible. The same people who will scrub their backs in 10 minutes now whisper prayers for purity. Maybe that's the real secret. Hygiene is just devotion that smells better. A boy carrying a tray of little votive soaps passes by. Each is shaped like a tiny hand, a foot, or a heart. He sells them to worshippers who toss them into the pools as offerings for healing or love. The gods like bubbles, he says, grinning. You buy one shaped like a hand. It smells faintly of lavender, and drop it gently into the nearest basin. It sinks slowly, trailing a wisp of foam. For a moment, it looks like the water is blessing you back. You move toward the smaller chamber known as the sudatorium, where steam thickens to mist. The air is so warm you can taste it. On a pedestal near the wall sits another idol, this one rougher, Mercury. patron of merchants and thieves. Someone has draped a towel over his shoulders like a joke. You chuckle quietly. Even the gods need spa days in Rome. A man beside you mutters that certain bathhouses have guardian spirits, lares thermarum, they're called, who keep the pipes flowing and the floors from cracking. He nods seriously. If the water runs cold, he says, it means they're displeased. He flicks a coin into a pool to be safe. You follow suit. It's not the day to offend anyone controlling hot water. Historians still debate whether these bathhouse gods were real deities or personifications of maintenance workers. Either way, the logic tracks. Rome worships function. If something keeps you clean, it deserves a shrine. Even the Hippocaust, the furnace under the floor, has a small altar nearby. Someone has left a loaf of bread beside it, a snack for Vulcan, god of fire. You half expect him to belch in approval from the pipes below. As you wander, you overhear two older women discussing omens. One says that if you drop your strigil mid-scrape, it means bad luck unless you cleanse it in perfumed oil. The other disagrees. That's only true if it lands blade up. Their debate spirals into laughter that sounds more like cackling. Ritual or gossip, it hardly matters. Both serve the same purpose, to make the day predictable in a world that rarely is. A splash interrupts the quiet. You turn to see a young man dunking his head in the cold basin 3 times, muttering a quick prayer to Neptune. When he surfaces, he looks genuinely refreshed. For clarity, he explains, before meeting my employer. You smile. The gods of hygiene are versatile. They grant courage, clarity, and a cleaner scalp, all in one go. You step outside for a moment, needing air. The bath's outer wall is carved with reliefs of nymphs pouring water from urns. At their feet, a small altar smolders with incense. A sign warns, keep the area pure. A few steps away, however, a dog scratches itself with divine disregard. Rome, in one picture, sanctity and scratching existing side by side. The smell of incense follows you into the street. You glance back at the bathhouse door, where fresh laurel branches hang, green against the marble. Above them, a tiny carving of Hygeia looks down serenely. The steam from inside curls around her like breath, and for a second you could almost believe she's alive. Historians still debate whether Romans bathed to honor the gods or simply out of habit. The answer feels obvious now. Both. In Rome, habit becomes holiness the moment you repeat it enough. Scrubbing, scraping, soaking, all small prayers disguised as hygiene. As you walk away, you pass another shrine at the corner of the street. This one older, soot-darkened. Its offering simple, crumbs, flowers, a few copper coins. Someone has scrawled a message on the wall. Purity is patience. You trace the words with your fingers, feeling their roughness, their truth. Maybe the city isn't just washing itself. It's reminding everyone that being clean in a dirty world is its own kind of faith. You turn one last time toward the baths, their windows glowing like lanterns in the fog. The hum of voices, the hiss of steam, the quiet chants, all blend into something that sounds almost sacred. Rome's prayers aren't whispered to the sky. They're spoken through water. And tonight, the city feels freshly baptized, at least until morning. You leave the scent of incense behind and head toward the open road, following the echo of marching boots fading into the distance. Rome doesn't only wash within its marble walls. Its hygiene travels with its armies. The Via Appia stretches out like a pale ribbon under the sun, stones polished smooth by centuries of feet, hooves and wheels. You walk beside a column of soldiers resting near a mile marker. Their armor glints, their faces shine with sweat, and their clothes carry that familiar combination of leather, iron, and road dust. "Sit," one of them offers, patting the ground. "You smell clean. Must have come from the city baths." His grin is tired but good-natured. You sit beside him, the heat rising from the stones like invisible steam. He pulls out a small flask and pours water over his hands, rubbing them together briskly before passing it down the line. The water's barely enough for a sip, but they share it anyway. Even on campaign, Rome carries its rituals: wash, oil, scrape, march. Historians still argue whether Roman soldiers were the cleanest or dirtiest men in antiquity. They built bathhouses at outposts, but they also marched for weeks without spare clothes. Some accounts describe meticulous hygiene routines: daily shaves, oiled skin, polished armor. Others mention lice, rashes, and the stench of tents in summer. The truth, as always, probably lies somewhere between glory and grime. You watch one soldier kneel by a small ditch where trickling water pools. He splashes his face, gasps at the cold, then grins. "Best thing on the road," he says. Another follows, rubbing his arms with sand before rinsing. It's crude exfoliation, but effective. The grains scrub away sweat and dirt better than any city strigil. You join them, letting the rough texture bite gently into your skin. It feels honest, cleanliness earned, not performed. Nearby, a medicus, an army doctor, prepares a mixture of vinegar and water, handing it to soldiers for washing wounds and gear. "Kills the rot," he mutters. You notice the faint, sharp smell rising from the cloths they soak. Roman vinegar, their miracle cure, again pulling double duty. He cleans a cut on a young recruit's arm, then ties it with a strip of linen dipped in honey. The soldier flinches. "If it stings, it's working," the doctor says dryly. Some advice never changes. The camp itself, when you reach it, is a model of order. Tents align in perfect rows, latrines dug at measured distances, trenches channeling runoff water away from sleeping quarters. Even their dirt is disciplined. You watch as a centurion inspects the ditches, barking praise or correction like an architect of mud. "Filth breeds fear," he says when you pass. "We keep neither in the legions." Historians still debate how well this sanitation system worked. Some camps left behind layers of ash and garbage. Others reveal near-obsessive cleanliness. One archaeologist once called the Roman army a mobile municipality with soap. You like that image, a city on sandals, carrying its hygiene on its back. A group of soldiers sit polishing their helmets with oil-soaked cloths. They talk idly about home, about wives who complain when they don't wash enough, about comrades who never cared to. One jokes, "I'd rather fight a Gaul than my mother after a week without a bath." The laughter ripples down the line. You can't help smiling, even here, far from Rome's marble baths. The same domestic gods follow them. Dinner is simple: porridge, bread, maybe a scrap of meat. Afterward, a few soldiers take turns washing their hands in a shallow basin. The water turns gray, but the gesture matters more than the result. One sprinkles a pinch of salt into it to keep demons away. Another spits into the dirt, muttering, "For luck." You realize hygiene on the road isn't just about health. It's morale, a reminder that they're still Roman, still civilized, even ankle-deep in mud. You watch one soldier scrape grime from under his nails with the point of his dagger, then wipe it on his sandal strap. "Clean enough," he says with satisfaction. Then he pulls out a small comb carved from bone and runs it through his cropped hair. You spot tiny white specks falling, lice maybe. He flicks them into the fire without comment. The crackle sounds oddly triumphant. Later, when the camp quiets, you see a few men washing clothes in the same ditch from earlier, beating them against flat stones. The water runs murky, carrying flecks of soapwort foam. One hums a marching tune under his breath. You join in quietly, your voice blending with the low rhythm of fabric against rock. For a moment, the army feels almost domestic, like 100 households under canvas roofs. A young recruit asks if you've ever traveled with the legions. You shake your head. You learn fast out here, he says, smiling faintly. The enemy's one thing. Dirt's the real killer. He gestures toward the latrine trenches beyond the tents, carefully marked with torches. Dig deep, always downhill, he adds. You nod. The advice feels like philosophy. Historians still debate how often disease wiped out armies before battle. Dysentery, typhoid, malaria, all flourished when hygiene failed. Yet Rome's legions endured for centuries, proof that their systems worked more often than not. The soldiers didn't need to understand microbes to know that clean water meant survival. Their rituals of washing, burning waste, and oiling skin weren't superstition, they were strategy. As night falls, you sit beside the campfire, the smell of smoke and vinegar lingering in your hair. The soldiers laugh softly, trading stories about home baths and city luxuries. One swears he'll build his own bathhouse if he ever retires. Another says he'd settle for a hot stream and a quiet night. You watch the flames flicker against polished armor and realize the truth. Every Roman, whether senator or soldier, dreams of warmth and water. When it's time to sleep, you lie back under the open sky, the Milky Way spilling across the dark like powdered marble. The air is cooler now, the smell of sweat replaced by earth and smoke. You close your eyes, feeling the faint grit on your skin, a reminder that even the cleanest moments out here are temporary. Still, there's peace in that. Rome's hygiene might be awkward, improvised, sometimes absurd, but it's resilient. Like the empire itself, it refuses to decay quietly. Somewhere, a soldier snores, another mumbles a prayer to Hygiene. The wind carries the scent of ash and oil. You let it lull you, thinking that perhaps the road itself is the greatest bath of all, scrubbing, scouring, cleansing as it wears you down. Tomorrow, you'll rise dusty again, ready to rinse in the nearest stream, ready to keep moving, clean, dirty, alive. The road back into the city feels quieter this time, as though Rome itself has exhaled. The bustle still hums somewhere ahead, vendors shouting, sandals slapping stone, but the edges are softer, like the city's been washed in twilight. You walk slower now, skin warm, eyes half-lidded from fatigue, and the steady lull of evening air. You can almost taste the mineral tang of the aqueduct misting the breeze. Your path leads you toward one of the smaller bathhouses again, its doorway glowing amber in the dusk. People file out, clean and drowsy, their voices low. You slip inside for one last visit, drawn not by grime, but by habit. The heat greets you like an old friend, thick, forgiving, tinged with eucalyptus. A few lamps flicker above the pools, their reflections trembling like molten gold. You ease yourself into the warm water. Every sound softens, the splash of hands, the faint hum of conversation, a sigh from someone lowering into the next pool. The warmth climbs up your limbs, drawing the road dust out through your pores. You smell olive oil, lavender, wet stone. Someone laughs softly across the room, the sound echoing like a bell underwater. This time, you don't rush through the motions. You let the oil sit heavy on your skin before scraping it away with your strigil, slow and deliberate. The curve of bronze glides over your shoulder, catching faint streaks of road dust and salt. Each pass feels symbolic, layers of the day, the journey, the city itself slipping free. A lifetime of grime disguised as civilization, rinsed into the drain. You close your eyes and imagine the water's path beyond the walls. It will run through pipes, through gutters, into sewers, into the Tiber, carrying 1,000 tiny pieces of Roman life, oil, sweat, perfume, ash, and dreams. And maybe, just maybe, that's the truest portrait of the empire, not the marble or the politics, but the residue it leaves behind. Historians still argue whether Rome was clean or dirty, whether its baths and aqueducts made it a miracle of sanitation or a monument to denial. You decide it's both. The city scrubbed and scraped, perfumed and purified, yet it could never quite rinse itself of humanity's messiness. Maybe that's what made it beautiful. The water around you ripples as a few more bathers slide in. Someone hums, a tune you recognize from the tavern the other night. The melody drifts lazily across the steam, half lullaby, half drunken memory. You let it guide your breathing. Inhale, warm air, faintly metallic. Exhale, the fatigue of centuries. When you finally climb out, your skin glows faintly in the lamplight. A slave hands you a small towel, still warm from the furnace. You press it to your face, feeling the fibers drink the last of the water from your eyelashes. Another hands you a vial of oil. You rub a drop into your wrists, the scent of chamomile wrapping around you like silk. Clean or not, it feels like peace. Outside, the air has cooled. The city's noise is muffled now, replaced by a soft, irregular rhythm, the sound of fountains and footsteps, and the faraway creak of cartwheels. You make your way toward your insula, climbing the narrow stairs that groan beneath your sandals. Someone down the corridor hums as they wash dishes. Someone else pours leftover bathwater out the window. Rome's bedtime chorus. You stretch out on your narrow cot. The linen sheet, still damp from its last wash, smells faintly of smoke and lavender. A cat curls in the doorway, tail flicking like a metronome. Through the window, you can see the outline of an aqueduct against the starlit sky, a skeleton of arches carrying the city's lifeblood in silence. The night breeze carries faint scents, bread cooling in an oven, incense burning at a corner shrine, damp clay from the street. You think about everything you've seen, the baths and drains, the oils and perfumes, the laundry vats, the vinegar basins, the gods of water and cleanliness. Every ritual, from scraping to praying, built the illusion that Rome could outwash decay. And maybe, in its own way, it did. You run your palm over your arm. It feels smooth, unfamiliar, almost new. Somewhere beneath the surface, a pulse beats steady. You think of the Tiber again, dirty, endless, indispensable. Rome's great paradox flows through your veins now. To live here is to live between filth and faith, always rinsing, never truly clean. The lamps flicker lower. The hum outside fades to a whisper. You breathe in, slow and deep, and imagine all of Rome exhaling with you. The baker at his oven, the washer at her tub, the soldier in his tent, the priest by his incense bowl. A city washing itself not for vanity, but for comfort, for the small reassurance that water, no matter how cloudy, will carry the day away. The air feels heavy with warmth and olive oil. You pull the sheet higher, listening to the faint drip of a leaky pipe outside, a rhythm older than sleep. The room smells faintly of rose and stone dust, and as your thoughts dissolve into the hush, you realize that in this city of marble and grime, perfection was never the goal. The Romans cleaned because it reminded them they were alive, sweating, bleeding, laughing, existing against the odds. Hygiene was hope with a sponge and a bucket. The cat sighs and curls tighter. Somewhere, water keeps running. And Rome, for all its awkward hygiene and endless ambition, begins to dream again of fountains that never clog, streets that never stink, and mornings that always begin with clean hands. The city softens around you now. The stone fades to dusk blue, the air cooling with every heartbeat. You can almost hear the water beneath the streets, whispering through its channels, rinsing the dust from another long day. The scent of olive oil still lingers faintly on your skin, mixing with the sweetness of night air. Your breath slows. The noises that filled your ears just an hour ago, wheels, sandals, laughter, are gone now, replaced by the gentle trickle of fountains and the hush of distant waves from the Tiber. You let that sound wash through you. Imagine it, slipping around your shoulders, over your hands, carrying away every echo of the city's noise. You're weightless now, floating between lamp glow and starlight. Every pore sighs, every thought unwinds. Rome itself seems to settle, the smell of incense curling like a final exhale over rooftops. You picture the bathhouses cooling, the pipes emptying, the marble drying under moonlight. Maybe tomorrow the streets will be loud again, the drains will clog, the fountains overflow. But for now, everything is still. Every flaw feels softened, every imperfection forgiven. The air smells of soapwort and lavender, like the world's pulse has been rinsed clean. You breathe in one last time, slow, full, and let it go just as slowly. The water carries everything away, the dust, the chatter, the centuries. And in that soft emptiness, you find what the Romans were always chasing. Not perfection, not purity, but peace.